The Insider. Chapter 1. The Call. Daniel Briggs was a man of careful decisions. Every step he took, every motion he made, had been calculated from the moment he first entered law school. Now, as a top attorney at the prestigious firm Landon & Warren, his career was at its peak. He was well aware of the battles fought behind closed doors, the contracts signed with ink dipped in secrecy. But nothing could have prepared him for the call that would change everything. The office phone rang at 10:43 p.m., long after the rest of the firm had gone home. Daniel usually left around 7 p.m., but tonight, paperwork kept him grounded. The phone startled him in the quiet room. Clients rarely called this late. Curiosity tugged at him as he reached for the receiver. "Briggs," he answered, his voice steady, professional. The line was quiet for a moment, then a low voice spoke. "You don't know me, but you'll want to listen." Daniel felt the tension rise in his chest. The voice was calm but carried an edge, something dark lingering just beneath the surface. "Who is this?" Daniel asked, leaning forward in his chair. "My name doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is what I know. I have information on RidgeCorp that could ruin them, and if you're smart, it'll make you very rich." RidgeCorp. The name sent a jolt through Daniel's veins. It was one of the largest multinational corporations in the world, a titan in energy, real estate, and pharmaceuticals. Daniel had represented their interests on several occasions. But like many corporate giants, rumors of corruption followed RidgeCorp like a shadow. What kind of information? Daniel pressed, trying to keep his voice neutral, though his mind raced with possibilities. Information that can bring them down. Their entire operation is built on lies, cover-ups, and illegal dealings. I have documents, files, names. I'm talking about billions of dollars. You help me expose them, and you'll never have to work another day in your life. Daniel hesitated. This could be a setup, a scam, or worse, a trap. But if it was real, the potential was too great to ignore. "Why me?" Daniel asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Because I've been watching you," the voice said coldly. "You're clean, and you're smart. You know how to play the game without getting your hands dirty. But make no mistake, this isn't just a game. If you take this on, you'll be going up against forces you can't imagine. And they won't hesitate to destroy you if they find out." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "Why are you doing this?" "Let's just say my time with RidgeCorp is over, and I have some scores to settle. You'll get the files tomorrow. Be ready." The line went dead before Daniel could respond. He sat there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind whirling. What had he just gotten himself into? The next morning, a package arrived at his office. No return address, no name, just a plain brown envelope. Inside, he found a USB drive and a note. "Play this somewhere safe." Daniel's pulse quickened as he slipped the drive into his briefcase and glanced around the office. The walls suddenly felt closer, as if the very building was watching him. He needed to get out. As he drove home, his eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Was someone following him? Was this paranoia, or had the first move in a dangerous game already been made? At his apartment, Daniel locked the door, drew the curtains, and inserted the drive into his laptop. The files were extensive: bank records, emails, internal memos, and contracts. RidgeCorp was indeed hiding something massive, and Daniel was now holding the keys to their demise. But with that power came a price. He could feel it, and someone, somewhere, was already watching. What would you do in Daniel's place? Follow for more, and stay tuned to uncover the next twist. Chapter 2. The Package. Daniel spent the next few hours poring over the contents of the USB drive, unable to shake the growing sense of dread curling in his gut. Every document, every line of code pointed to one undeniable fact: RidgeCorp had been funneling billions of dollars through offshore accounts, laundering money, and bribing government officials across multiple countries. It was all there in black and white. It wasn't just illegal, it was a conspiracy of staggering proportions. His fingers hovered over his laptop keys. Should he dig deeper? Was there more? Every fiber of his being screamed at him to back away, to erase the files and pretend none of this ever happened. But curiosity, or maybe greed, overpowered his caution. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, startling him. Daniel nearly knocked over his coffee as he fumbled to pick it up. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Did you receive the package?" Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The message was a reminder that whoever this informant was, they knew exactly where he lived and exactly what he was doing. He hesitated before typing a single word back, "Yes." Moments later, another message appeared, "Good. Be ready for more instructions soon." His heart pounded in his chest. This was bigger than anything he had ever been involved in, and with every new step, the risk seemed to grow exponentially. But now, he was entangled in it. There was no simple way out. Later that night, he sat in his darkened living room, the glow of the laptop illuminating his troubled face. He tried to think of the angles. Who was behind this? Could the informant be trusted? Would RidgeCorp find out? He knew his own firm had close ties to RidgeCorp, and the moment they got wind of what he had, everything would implode. The sound of a car engine outside made him freeze. He cautiously approached the window, parting the blinds just enough to peer outside. A black sedan idled across the street, its headlights off. Was it just a coincidence? Or had RidgeCorp already sent someone to watch him? His pulse quickened as he returned to his laptop. He couldn't just sit on this. He needed help, someone he could trust. But who? Talking to his colleagues was out of the question. Too many of them had worked with RidgeCorp. They could be compromised. There was one name that came to mind, Claire Hathaway, an investigative journalist who had a reputation for taking down corrupt corporations. Daniel had crossed paths with her briefly during a previous case, and she had always struck him as fearless and relentless in her pursuit of the truth. He found her number in his contacts, his finger hovering over the dial button. This was a dangerous move, bringing someone else into the fold. But Daniel had no choice. He needed an ally who wasn't part of the legal or corporate world, someone who could help him navigate the minefield he had stumbled into. The phone rang twice before Claire's voice, sharp and businesslike, answered. "Hathaway." "Claire, it's Daniel Briggs," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a pause. "Briggs? I didn't expect to hear from you. What's this about?" "I need your help," he said, lowering his voice instinctively, as if someone might be listening through the walls. "It's about RidgeCorp. I have something big, something that could bring them down." There was a silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "RidgeCorp? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I have documents, proof of offshore accounts, bribes, everything." He heard her shift on the other end, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Daniel, do you know what you're getting into? They don't play by the rules. If you're sitting on that kind of information, you're already in danger." "I know," Daniel replied, glancing nervously out the window again. The black sedan was still there. "But I don't know who else to trust." There was a pause, then Claire's voice turned resolute. "Okay, meet me tomorrow. Same place as last time. And Daniel, be careful." She hung up before he could respond, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the ominous presence of the black car outside. As the night wore on, Daniel's paranoia deepened. Every creak in the apartment seemed louder, every shadow more menacing. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with restless dreams. Tomorrow, he would meet Claire. Tomorrow, they would decide the next step. But for now, the clock ticked on, and with it, Daniel's uneasy sense that time was running out. What will happen at Daniel's meeting with Claire? Subscribe and stay tuned for the shocking twists ahead. Chapter 3. The Meeting. The early morning sky was overcast, casting a gray pallor over the city as Daniel made his way to the cafe where he had agreed to meet Claire. It was a quiet place on the outskirts of town, far from the gleaming office towers of downtown. The kind of place where people went to disappear. Daniel's nerves were frayed from the sleepless night, his eyes constantly scanning the road behind him. He had taken extra care to ensure he wasn't followed, circling through various streets before arriving at the cafe. But even as he parked his car, an uneasy feeling clung to him like a second skin. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fresh bread, but Daniel barely noticed. He spotted Claire at a corner table, her sharp eyes already watching him as he entered. She was dressed in a plain jacket, her hair tied back, looking every bit the journalist who had seen too much. He slid into the chair across from her, his briefcase heavy on his lap. "You're late," Claire said without preamble, though her tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. Her gaze flicked over him, taking in the tension in his posture, the slight tremor in his hands. "I had to be careful," Daniel replied. "I think they're watching me." She nodded, as if she expected that. "Tell me everything," she said quietly, leaning in. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then pulled out the USB drive from his jacket pocket, placing it on the table between them. Claire's eyes locked onto it, the weight of what it represented clear in her expression. "This," he said, tapping the drive, "is a bomb waiting to go off. It's got everything: offshore accounts, illegal contracts, bribes to foreign officials, shell companies. RidgeCorp has been laundering billions for years, and it's all laid out right here." Claire didn't move, her gaze fixed on the small piece of plastic and metal that could potentially blow open one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. "How did you get this?" "A source," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. "They called me out of nowhere. I don't know who they are, but they had access to everything." Claire's eyebrows knitted together in concern. "And you trust this source?" Daniel paused, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know. But what's on this drive, it's real. I verified some of the documents myself. If this gets out, RidgeCorp could be finished." Claire reached for the USB drive, but Daniel's hand covered it before she could take it. "There's more," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think RidgeCorp knows I have this. They've been watching me. Last night, there was a car outside my apartment." Claire's expression darkened. "They won't hesitate to come after you if they think you're a threat. You know that, right?" "I do," Daniel admitted, the gravity of the situation sinking deeper into his bones. "But if we don't do something, they'll keep getting away with it. People are getting hurt because of what they're doing. This has to come out." Claire leaned back in her chair, thinking. "If we're going to take RidgeCorp down, we have to do this the right way. We can't just release this information, we need a plan. Something airtight." Daniel nodded, but his attention wavered. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a man sitting by the window. The man wasn't looking at them directly, but Daniel's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The man's posture was too stiff, his movements too deliberate. "We might not have time," Daniel whispered, his voice tense. "I think we're being watched." Claire's eyes flicked to the man without giving anything away. "Stay calm," she said, her voice a little tighter. "Finish your coffee and leave separately. I'll be in touch." Daniel nodded, his throat dry. He left some bills on the table, stood up slowly, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. His heart pounded as he stepped onto the sidewalk, forcing himself to walk at a normal pace. But as soon as he turned the corner, panic hit him full force. The streets seemed too quiet, the parked cars too still. Were they following him? Was the man in the cafe just the first of many? He glanced around, searching for any sign of pursuit, when he noticed the black sedan from the night before parked at the far end of the street. His blood ran cold. Without thinking, Daniel turned sharply and broke into a run. His footsteps echoed in the empty alleyway as he cut through narrow streets, hoping to lose whoever might be following him. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Could RidgeCorp have already sent someone after him? How long before they acted? His phone buzzed in his pocket, startling him. It was Claire. You were right. Get to a safe place, now. They're onto us. Daniel didn't stop running. What will happen now that Daniel and Claire are being pursued? Subscribe and share to see what unfolds in this thrilling story. Chapter 4. The Escape. Daniel's lungs burned as he sprinted down the narrow alleyway, the fear of being hunted gnawing at the edges of his mind. His thoughts spiraled, darting between panic and strategy. He had no plan, no idea where to go, only the instinct to keep moving. RidgeCorp's reach was long, and if they had eyes on him, time was running out. His phone buzzed again. He didn't dare stop, but the screen lit up with another message from Claire. Meet me at 32 Eastbourne, rooftop parking. Now. Eastbourne. He knew the building, a mid-rise in a less trafficked part of town. The rooftop parking deck could offer some privacy, but also, potentially, a trap. He had no choice. Claire was his only ally now, and if she trusted the location, so would he. As he ran, Daniel's eyes darted around, checking for anyone tailing him. The streets were busier now, the morning crowd oblivious to the terror gripping him. It offered him some cover. He could disappear in the sea of people. He slowed his pace, trying to blend in, but his heart still pounded in his chest, his mind replaying the events of the last 24 hours. The mysterious call. The USB drive. RidgeCorp closing in. When he reached Eastbourne, Daniel took a moment to collect himself. He ducked into a nearby alley, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and tried to slow his racing heart. His eyes swept the area, and seeing no sign of immediate danger, he cautiously approached the building, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. The last thing he needed was to be trapped in a metal box. The climb up 6 flights of stairs felt endless. His legs ached, and the adrenaline that had fueled his flight began to fade, leaving a raw exhaustion in its place. When he finally reached the rooftop, the cool breeze hit his face, and for a brief moment, the vast openness of the sky above gave him a fleeting sense of safety. Then he saw Claire. She stood near the edge of the parking deck, her arms crossed, eyes scanning the surroundings with a sharp intensity. When she spotted him, her expression softened, though the tension in her posture remained. "You made it," she said, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city below. "Barely," Daniel replied, catching his breath. "That black sedan. I saw it again." Claire nodded grimly. "I saw it too. They're definitely on to us. RidgeCorp isn't wasting any time." Daniel leaned against a concrete pillar, running a hand through his hair. "What do we do now? How can we even begin to fight them when they're already this close?" Claire's eyes narrowed, her voice steady and fierce. "We expose them. We go public with everything. I've got contacts at a few news outlets who would kill for a story like this. But we need to move fast. RidgeCorp has deep pockets, and they'll use every resource to silence you, and me." Daniel's stomach tightened at the thought. What if we can't stop them? What if they come for us before we can do anything? "They might," Claire admitted, her gaze hard. "But we can't back down now. We have enough to start a fire that they won't be able to put out." As she spoke, Daniel noticed movement behind her. His pulse spiked. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward him just as a dark figure emerged from the stairwell. The man was dressed in black, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap, but his intent was unmistakable. "We need to go," Daniel whispered urgently. Claire nodded, her eyes wide with realization. They turned to flee, but the man was already moving toward them, his steps quick and determined. Daniel scanned the rooftop for an escape route. There was no time to wait for the elevator, and the stairwell was now blocked. His eyes fell on the far side of the parking deck, where a fire escape ladder hung down the side of the building. "This way," he hissed, grabbing Claire's hand and pulling her toward the edge. They sprinted across the rooftop. The sound of their footsteps echoed against the concrete. Behind them, the men gave chase, his pace steady and relentless. Daniel reached the fire escape and jumped up to grab the metal ladder, pulling it down with a loud clang. Claire scrambled down first, and Daniel followed, his heart pounding as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. As they descended, Daniel dared a glance up and saw the men lean over the edge, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. They had just barely escaped, but Daniel knew this was only the beginning. When they reached the street level, Daniel and Claire ducked into an alley and kept moving, weaving through the city's backstreets in a desperate attempt to stay out of sight. The tension between them was palpable, but there was no time to talk, no time to process what had just happened. After what felt like hours of running, they finally stopped behind an old warehouse, hidden from view. Daniel leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," Claire said, her voice equally strained. "But we're not safe." "Not yet." Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to think. They needed a plan. RidgeCorp wouldn't stop until they were both silenced, and if that man had found them this easily, others would too. But they couldn't give up. The truth had to come out. Claire looked at him, her eyes fierce and determined. "We need to go underground. Hide for a while. I know a place." Daniel nodded, too exhausted to argue. As they slipped back into the shadows, he couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep running, and if they would ever be safe again. Will Daniel and Claire find safety, or will RidgeCorp close in on them? Follow and share to stay tuned for the next thrilling chapter. Chapter 5. Into the Shadows. The city seemed to shift around them as Daniel and Claire moved through its labyrinth of streets. The sounds of cars and chatter faded into the background as they slipped deeper into the forgotten parts of town. The tension between them was thick, unspoken but understood. They were in a race for survival, and RidgeCorp wouldn't rest until they were both silenced. Claire led the way, her steps swift and sure. She clearly had a plan, and Daniel was too drained to question it. They kept to the alleyways, avoiding the main roads and any place where cameras might catch their movements. Every passing stranger felt like a potential threat, every dark corner another trap. After what felt like hours of moving through the shadows, Claire stopped in front of an old, run-down building. The windows were boarded up, the brick walls stained with graffiti. It looked abandoned, but there was an air of secrecy about it, like it was meant to be forgotten. "We'll be safe here," Claire said, her voice low but confident. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a key, unlocking a heavy iron door that led into the building. Daniel hesitated for a moment. The place reeked of desperation, dusty, abandoned, a hideout for people who had nowhere else to go. But right now, it was all they had. He followed Claire inside, the door creaking shut behind them with a heavy thud. The interior was as rundown as the outside, but there were signs of life. Blankets spread on the floor, stacks of newspapers and magazines, and a few small lamps casting dim light. It was clear this wasn't Claire's first time here. She turned to him, her expression grim. "We'll lay low here for a while. RidgeCorp's reach is long, but they can't track us if we stay off the grid." Daniel exhaled slowly, his body sagging with exhaustion. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline, and now that they had a moment to breathe, the weight of it all crashed down on him. "What now?" he asked, sinking onto an old couch. "How do we stop them?" Claire sat across from him, her gaze sharp. "We wait. I've already sent word to my contacts. They're preparing to release the story, but it's going to take time. RidgeCorp will be in damage control mode by the time the news breaks, but we need to make sure we're safe until then." Daniel nodded, though a part of him felt numb. He had always been a man of action, strategizing, planning, making moves. But now, hiding felt like surrender. "What if they find us before then?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Claire's expression darkened. "They'll try," she admitted. "But I have people who owe me favors. We won't be easy to find." The silence that followed was heavy, but not without purpose. Daniel's mind raced through the events that had brought him here, wondering where he had gone wrong. The call from the informant, the files on the USB drive, it all felt like a trap, but he had no choice but to play along. And then there was the looming question of the informant. Who were they? Why had they chosen Daniel to be the one to expose RidgeCorp's dirty secrets? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. As if sensing his thoughts, Claire broke the silence. "I don't trust this source of yours," she said bluntly. "Whoever they are, they know too much. And they're keeping too many cards close to the chest." Daniel frowned. He had been thinking the same thing, but hearing Claire's voice, it only amplified his concerns. "I don't know who they are," he admitted. "They called me out of nowhere, dropped this bomb in my lap, and now I'm the one being hunted." Claire leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That's what bothers me. You were targeted, Daniel. This whole thing was orchestrated. Someone wanted you involved, and now we're caught in the middle." The weight of her words settled heavily on him. He had thought the informant was some disgruntled insider, someone looking to settle a score with RidgeCorp. But Claire was right, this was too calculated. Too perfect. "Do you think they're still out there?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Watching us?" Claire's jaw clenched. "It's possible. We need to be careful about everything. If this informant is still pulling the strings, they could be leading us into a trap." A cold knot formed in Daniel's stomach. He had been so focused on the threat from RidgeCorp that he hadn't considered the possibility that his mysterious ally might be playing a far more dangerous game. Claire stood up, crossing the room to a narrow window. She pulled back the heavy curtain just enough to peer outside, her eyes scanning the dark street below. "For now, we stay low," she said. "We wait for my contacts to make their move. Once the story breaks, RidgeCorp will be in the spotlight, and they'll have bigger problems than hunting us." Daniel nodded, though the sense of unease lingered. Waiting felt like a gamble, one that could cost them everything if they were wrong. As the night wore on, they both settled into the uneasy quiet of their hideout, listening for every creak, every whisper of movement outside. Daniel's mind wandered to the USB drive, to the weight of the secrets it held, and the unseen hand that had placed it in his life. Somewhere out there, the real game was being played. And Daniel was beginning to realize he was just a pawn. Are Daniel and Claire walking into a trap? Will the truth come out before it's too late? Subscribe and stay tuned for the next pulse-pounding chapter. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The night was thick with tension. Every sound outside the crumbling walls of the hideout seemed amplified. The distant hum of the city, the occasional honk of a horn, and the faint footsteps that Daniel could have sworn he heard circling the building. Sleep felt impossible. He and Claire had spent hours in silence, waiting for a call, a message, anything to give them hope that the story was making its way into the right hands. But it never came. Claire paced the room, her nerves clearly fraying. "Something's not right," she muttered under her breath, glancing at the dark windows as if the shadows themselves were conspiring against them. "We should have heard by now." Daniel had been thinking the same thing, but he couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. The silence from Claire's contacts was deafening, and every minute that passed made him more certain that they were running out of time. The weight of the USB drive in his pocket felt like a lead weight pulling him deeper into a dangerous abyss. He had been carrying it with him since they fled the rooftop, too afraid to leave it behind. Now, he wondered if it was more a curse than a weapon. Just as Daniel was about to suggest they move to another location, Claire's phone buzzed on the table. The sound was sharp in the stillness, making both of them jump. She snatched it up, glancing at the screen. Her face paled. "What is it?" Daniel asked, dread creeping into his voice. Claire didn't answer immediately. She stared at the screen, her expression hardening before she turned the phone toward him. The message was simple: "They're coming. Get out. Now." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Who sent that?" "One of my contacts," Claire said, grabbing her bag. Her movements were quick, practiced. "We need to leave. If they know we're here." A sudden crash outside the door cut her off. The unmistakable sound of boots on concrete followed, heavy and deliberate. Daniel's heart raced as Claire pulled him toward the back of the room. "Go," she hissed, pushing him toward a second exit, a rusted door that led to an alleyway. They burst through the door just as the front entrance was kicked open, the thud of footsteps chasing after them. Daniel's breath was ragged as they sprinted down the narrow alley, his mind spinning. How had RidgeCorp found them so quickly? Had someone betrayed them? They darted through the maze of backstreets, staying low and out of sight, but Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before they were cornered. His mind raced, trying to figure out their next move, but nothing seemed like a way out. Ahead, Claire skidded to a halt, pulling Daniel into a dark alcove between two buildings. They pressed themselves against the cold, damp walls, trying to catch their breath. Footsteps echoed somewhere nearby, but for now, they seemed hidden. Daniel leaned his head back, trying to control his breathing. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" he whispered. "No matter what we do." Claire was silent for a long moment before she shook her head. "No. RidgeCorp's too big, too powerful. And whoever this informant is, they played us." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire's gaze was sharp, but filled with grim understanding. "This was never just about exposing RidgeCorp. Whoever gave you that USB drive wanted us on the run. They wanted us isolated, cut off from help. Think about it. Why give you all the evidence but keep the one thing we need to actually bring them down?" Daniel stared at her, the realization dawning slowly. The informant. They knew RidgeCorp would come after us. They knew we'd be too focused on surviving to actually use the information. Claire nodded. "And now, they're closing in. Whoever this is, they've been 2 steps ahead the whole time." Daniel felt the weight of those words settle deep inside him. He had been so sure that the files would be enough, that the truth would set everything right. But now, it felt like they had been chasing a ghost, all while their enemy circled closer. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Claire could answer, the sound of a car engine revving in the distance sent a chill down his spine. The alley grew darker as headlights swept across the narrow walls, and the unmistakable shape of the black sedan rolled slowly past the entrance of their hiding spot. Daniel's pulse quickened. They were trapped. Claire grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "We can't stay here." They moved deeper into the shadows, but it was too late. The car stopped, and the door opened with a slow, deliberate creak. Daniel's heart pounded in his ears as a figure stepped out, his silhouette bathed in the dim glow of the street lamp. "Briggs," the man's voice called out, cold and calculating. "You've made this far more difficult than it needed to be." Daniel froze. The voice, it was the same one from the first phone call. The informant. You're the one who called me," Daniel stammered, stepping forward instinctively, anger rising. "Why are you doing this?" The man stepped into the light, revealing a face that was unsettlingly calm. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because someone had to push you. Someone had to make sure you didn't back down." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "You used me," the man shrugged. "And now RidgeCorp will pay. You've done your part, Briggs. But I'm afraid your usefulness has run its course." Before Daniel could react, Claire grabbed his arm. "We need to go. Now." They bolted into the darkness, the man's voice echoing behind them. "Run all you want. But you can't escape what's coming." As they disappeared into the night, Daniel realized the terrible truth. He had been nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.